The fishing village stirred in the soft glow of dawn, the salty breeze carrying whispers of waves crashing against the shore. The scent of the sea clung to the air, weaving through the narrow paths between mud brick huts. Inside one of these huts, Adebayo lay awake, listening to the rhythmic breathing of his daughter. Amina, his little star, his only family since his wife had passed. He turned to her, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. Her tiny hands were curled into fists against her chest, her face peaceful in sleep. Leaning down, he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, as he did every morning. Then without a sound, he rose. Outside, the world was still hushed, save for the distant cries of seagulls. Adebayo grabbed his worn fishing net and made his way to the shore, where his small wooden boat rocked with the tide. He had spent his life on the sea, learning its moods, reading its whispers. It had given him everything, his livelihood, his purpose. But it had also taken. His wife's laughter had once filled this village, her hands weaving baskets while Amina played at her feet. Now only memories remained, but Adebayo refused to let grief steal the joy from his daughter's eyes. By the time the sun climbed higher, Amina would wake and run to the shore, her tiny feet kicking up the warm sand. She would perch on the highest rock, scanning the horizon, waiting for her father's boat to return. And when he did, she would squeal with joy, waving both hands as if she could pull him home faster. In the evenings, they sat together by the water's edge, watching the waves roll in. Adebayo would tell her stories of the wise old turtle who had seen 1,000 storms, of the fish that glowed like stars in the deep. Amina listened, wide-eyed, hanging on to every word. One night she whispered, "Baba, do you think Mama watches us from the sea?" Adebayo's throat tightened, but he smiled. "Yes, my little star. The waves carry our love to her." Amina leaned against him, sighing softly. "Then I will always love the sea." Adebayo wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. He had lost so much, but as long as he had Amina, he had everything. But the sea, as much as it gave, could also take, and soon it would remind him of its unforgiving nature. The morning was perfect, the kind that made the sea look gentle, almost kind. The sky stretched endlessly, painted in soft hues of blue, and the waves lapped lazily against the shore. It was on this morning that Amina, her eyes full of excitement, tugged at Adebayo's hand. "Baba, please, let me come with you today," she begged, her small fingers clutching his worn fishing net. Adebayo's heart clenched. She had asked before, but he had always refused. The sea was unpredictable, even on days like this. But Amina was 7 now, and her mother's adventurous spirit burned bright in her eyes. Still, he hesitated. "The ocean is not a place for little girls, Amina," he said gently. "But you always say I must learn," she argued, her lips forming a stubborn pout. "How can I love the sea if I don't know it?" Adebayo sighed. How could he refuse her when she looked at him like that? He knelt and held her tiny hands in his calloused ones. "You must promise to listen. No moving unless I say so." Amina grinned, nodding eagerly. "I promise, Baba." He lifted her into the boat, his heart heavy with an unease he couldn't explain. The day started beautifully. The sea was calm, the sun warm on their backs. Adebayo showed Amina how to cast the net, guiding her small hands as they pulled it back. She laughed when tiny fish wriggled in the mesh, clapping her hands with pure delight. Adebayo watched her, a smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps he had been too fearful. Perhaps she truly belonged to the sea, just as he did. But then, a shadow moved across the water. Before Adebayo could react, the sea turned violent. A monstrous wave rose without warning, crashing into the boat with unforgiving force. Adebayo lunged for Amina, gripping the side of the boat as water swallowed them whole. Cold, dark, silence. He surfaced, gasping, blinking salt from his eyes. His hands clawed at the wooden edge of the boat. He was still here. He was still alive. But Amina, his breath hitched. She was gone. "Amina!" He roared her name, spinning frantically, searching for a flash of her green dress, her tiny hands reaching for him. Anything. He dove. Again. Again. The water burned his lungs, but he did not stop. He could not stop. The village heard his cries before they saw him. The men rushed to their boats, the women gathered on the shore. whispering prayers into trembling hands. For days they searched. They dragged nets across the water, called her name into the wind, but the ocean held its silence. Amina was gone. Adebayo no longer spoke, no longer fished. He became a shadow of himself, a man who wandered the shore from sunrise to sunset, eyes always on the waves, waiting for the sea to return what it had taken. The days blurred into nights, and still Adebayo wandered the shore. His feet carved a path into the sand, his eyes forever searching the waves. The villagers whispered about him, about the man who had once been full of life, now lost to grief. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, an old woman approached him. Mama Ease, the village elder, known for her wisdom and stories as old as the sea itself. She stood beside him, her weathered hands clutching a wooden staff. "You have become a ghost, Adebayo." He did not look at her. His gaze remained on the water. "The sea stole my daughter," he said, his voice hollow. Mama Ease sighed, her eyes filled with something between sorrow and understanding. "You must live, my son. You must eat. You must fish. Amina would not want you to waste away." Adebayo's jaw tightened. "I cannot live while she is gone." For a long moment, Mama Ease said nothing. Then she took a step closer and whispered, "Have you ever heard of the Mer people?" At this, Adebayo finally turned his head. He had heard the name before, whispered in stories passed from generation to generation. "They are not just stories," Mama Ez said, her voice as steady as the tide. "The Mer people live beneath the sea, in cities of light and gold. They are neither human nor fish, but something in between. And some say they have the power to return those lost to the waves." A spark flickered in Adebayo's chest, something he had not felt since Amina disappeared. Hope. "You believe this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mama Ezzy smiled sadly. "I believe the sea holds secrets we will never understand." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "But believing is not enough. If you wish to find her, you must seek the truth yourself." That night, Adebayo did not sleep. The next day, he began his search. He questioned the oldest fishermen, the travelers who passed through the village. He pored over stories carved into ancient stones, seeking any mention of the Mer people. Each night, he sat by the shore, watching the waves as if they might part and reveal a hidden world beneath. His obsession grew, and with it, the whispers in the village. Some called him mad, others pitied him, but Adebayo did not care. If there was even the slightest chance that the legends were true, if the Mer people existed, then perhaps Amina was not lost. Perhaps she was waiting. Adebayo was no longer the man the village once knew. His skin clung to his bones, his eyes hollow and fevered. He no longer spoke to those who tried to pull him back to life. He had only one purpose: to find the Mer people. Many believed the sea had cursed him, but Adebayo did not care. He spent his days searching, his nights watching the waves. Hope had turned to obsession, and obsession had turned to desperation. Then on the night of the storm, the ocean finally answered. The sky rumbled as dark clouds swallowed the stars. Rain lashed against the huts, and the wind howled through the village like a mourning mother. But Adebayo heard something else, a song. It drifted through the chaos, delicate and sorrowful, weaving through the thunder like a whisper only he could hear. It was not of this world. It called to him, pulling him toward the jagged rocks at the edge of the shore. His heart pounded as he stumbled forward, the rain blinding him, the waves crashing against the cliffs. Then he saw her. A small figure lay curled between the rocks, trembling. Her pale green skin shimmered under the lightning, her long flowing hair tangled with strands of seaweed, and her tail, iridescent and silver, gleamed like the moonlit ocean. A Mer child. Adebayo's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed that this was it, his chance, his proof. If the Mer people existed, then Amina was not lost. The girl lifted her head, her luminous eyes widening with fear. She tried to push herself back into the water, but Adebayo lunged, his hands closing around her frail, slippery arms. She let out a sharp, keening wail, a sound so heart-wrenching it nearly shattered his resolve. But Adebayo did not let go. "You will take me to them," he whispered, his grip tightening. "You will bring my daughter back." The little mermaid thrashed against him, her cries piercing through the storm. "Please," she sobbed, her voice barely human. "Let me go." But Adebayo's heart had hardened. He had lost too much. Ignoring her pleas, he lifted her into his arms and carried her away. Adebayo's hut, once filled with warmth and laughter, had become a place of shadows. He kept the windows covered, the door locked, the outside world shut away. Inside, huddled in the corner, was the mermaid child. She was small, fragile. Her pale green skin seemed even paler under the dim light of the oil lamp. Her long, tangled hair clung to her damp face, and her silver tail twitched weakly on the earthen floor. She had not spoken since he brought her here, only watched him with wide, terrified eyes. Adebayo crouched beside her, his voice gentler than before. "What is your name?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, "Coral." It was a name born from the sea itself, beautiful, delicate. But Adebayo could not afford to see her as a child, not when she was his only hope. He leaned closer. "Coral, you must take me to your people." She shook her head violently. "I can't." Adebayo's jaw clenched. "You're lying." Tears filled her luminous eyes. "I swear, I have no power to bring back the dead." He flinched at the word, dead. He refused to believe it. "The Mare people can," he insisted. "They can return those lost to the sea. I know the stories." Coral hugged her arms around herself. "They are just stories," she whispered. "No." Adebayo's voice darkened. "They are real, and you will help me find them." Coral trembled but said nothing. Adebayo turned away, his chest heaving. He had not wanted this, to be a man who frightened children, but grief had carved him into something unrecognizable. He would not lose Amina, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks. The village murmured about Adebayo's disappearance from the shore, but no one dared to question him. He remained locked in his hut, his world shrinking to a single purpose, forcing Coral to take him to the Mare people. But Coral never spoke of them. She spoke instead of the world beneath the waves. "My home is nothing like this place," she whispered. Adebayo, sitting near the door, glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Coral's eyes, luminous as the deep ocean, stared at the ceiling. "It's warm," she said, her voice distant. "Not cold like the deep sea. There are towers made of pearl and gardens that glow in the dark. We swim between them like birds in the sky." Adebayo frowned. "You said the stories were lies." Coral hesitated. "Some are," she admitted, "but not all." Adebayo leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Then tell me the truth." Coral sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "The truth is, I have a family too. A father who sings to me, a mother who weaves coral into her hair, a little brother who follows me everywhere." Her voice cracked. "And they don't know if I'm alive." Adebayo looked away, guilt flickering in his chest. He had not thought of her family, only of Amina. "Do you miss them?" she asked softly. He clenched his jaw. "More than I can bear." For the first time he spoke of Amina, of her laughter as she played in the sand, of the way she would race to him when he returned from the sea, arms flung wide, certain he would always catch her. Coral listened, her silver tail resting still against the floor. Then hesitantly, she asked, "Was she afraid of the sea?" Adebayo shook his head. "No," he whispered. "She loved it." Something in him cracked then. He had spent months chasing myths, believing the ocean had stolen his daughter. But Amina had loved the sea, had loved him for teaching her to trust it. And for the first time in a year, Adebayo smiled. Not out of hope, not out of relief, but because for the first time, he remembered her without pain. The night was quiet, the wind carrying only the soft lull of the waves. Adebayo sat by the dim glow of the lantern, his back against the wooden wall, staring at the small girl across from him. Coral traced patterns in the dirt with her fingers, her shimmering tail stretched beside her. "You don't have to be afraid of the sea," she murmured. Adebayo frowned. "I'm not afraid of it." Coral looked up, her luminous eyes filled with something deeper than her years. "Yes, you are," she said gently, "not of the sea itself, but of what it took from you." Adebayo's breath caught in his throat. He had spent every moment since Amina's disappearance fighting against the ocean, searching for a way to bend it to his will. But what if the sea had never taken her? What if she had simply gone? Coral continued, her voice soft but certain. The sea never truly keeps what it touches. The tide takes, but it also returns. Just like love. Adebayo swallowed hard. Love isn't a net, Coral whispered. It doesn't trap or hold. It moves, changes, but it never disappears. The words unraveled something inside him. His chest tightened, his throat burned. He had been so consumed by loss that he had not realized. Amina was not gone. She was in every wave that lapped the shore, in the salt that clung to his skin, in the warmth of the morning sun that had kissed her face just as it had kissed his. She was in his love, and love did not die. His hands trembled as he turned to Coral. His voice was raw, stripped of the anger and obsession that had consumed him. I was wrong. The words fell like stones from his lips. I thought, if I found your people, if I made them give her back, I could fix everything. He exhaled shakily. But I can't. Coral studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. A small, sad thing, but real. You were hurting, she said simply. People do terrible things when they hurt. Adebayo bowed his head. I took you from your family. Yes, I don't deserve forgiveness. Coral tilted her head. Maybe not, she admitted, but people can change. Adebayo's throat tightened. He had stolen this child from the ocean out of desperation, but she had given him back something he had thought lost forever. His love for Amina, his love for the sea, his love for life. With a deep, steadying breath, he stood and reached for the door. It was time to set Coral free. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft golds and pinks. The village still slept, unaware of the man walking toward the shore with a small mermaid child in his arms. Adebayo felt the cool morning breeze against his skin, the scent of salt filling his lungs. For the first time in a year, the sea did not feel like his enemy. Coral rested quietly in his hold, her silver tail hanging limp, exhausted from weeks away from the water. Yet when she looked up at him, her eyes held no fear. When they reached the shoreline, Adebayo knelt, setting her gently on the wet sand. The tide rushed forward, washing over her shimmering scales, welcoming her home. She turned to him, searching his face. You're letting me go? Adebayo nodded, his voice thick with emotion. You were never mine to keep. Coral blinked, then smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. Thank you, she whispered. Adebayo swallowed the lump in his throat. No, thank you. For teaching him what grief had made him forget, for reminding him that love, like the tide, never truly left. Coral lifted a hand, pressing her small palm against his. I hope you find peace, Adebayo. I already have, he murmured. With that, she turned toward the water. As the waves rolled in, she slipped beneath them, her shimmering tail flicking once before disappearing into the endless blue. Adebayo stayed there, kneeling in the surf, watching until the ocean was still again. But this time, it did not feel empty. He inhaled deeply, letting the wind fill his lungs, the sun warm his skin. He would fish again. He would laugh again. He would live again. And when he looked out at the sea, he would no longer see loss, only love, flowing eternal, just like the tide. Adebayo's journey reflects the painful reality of loss. His grief consumes him, driving him to desperation and obsession. But healing does not mean forgetting. It means finding a way to carry love forward instead of pain. Through Coral, he learns that love is not lost in death. It continues, just in a different form. Though Adebayo takes Coral in his darkest moment, she does not respond with hatred. Instead, she listens, understands, and shows him another way. Her compassion becomes the bridge that saves him. In return, Adebayo's heart opens again, proving that true connection can mend even the deepest wounds. The hardest part of grief is accepting what we cannot change. Adebayo believed he had to fight the sea to get Amina back. But in the end, he learned the opposite, to let go. Releasing Coral was his final act of love, not just for her, but for himself. It was proof that he was ready to live again. At its core, the ocean's promise is a story of loss, redemption, and the quiet strength of love that never truly leaves us.